Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Innovate Ireland meetup. This time we're taking a look at idea validation. We all know that the fun headline grabbing bit of innovation is generating ideas. But once we've got that killer idea, we're really good at convincing ourselves that this idea is just fantastic. We know it's just going to work. So there's an almost overwhelming desire to dive into production and not to bother with probably one of the most critical steps of the process, which is validation. But there's one sector where idea validation is taken really seriously, and that's the startup community. So we thought it'd be useful to hear about idea validation from that perspective. And luckily for us, within the Innovate Ireland community, we were able to tap into the energy, the enthusiasm, and the expertise of Martina Goss. So Martina comes from an accounting background, so is incredibly strong at making sure the financial business case stacks up. But she spent the last few years away from the numbers to a certain extent, working as program manager of an entrepreneurial development program, mentoring startups as they take new ideas through to commercialization. So Martina is now, I believe, in the process of going out on her own and applying some of these lessons commercially. So Martina, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience today, and I'll hand control over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlie, and hello everybody. It's great to be with you today. So I'm just going to start by slide share. I think there's a wee bit of background noise, Charlie, maybe? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
So hopefully you can all see my screen at the moment.
Yep.
So delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you today about, I guess, my perspective of idea validation based on my experience of working with startups. And I'd like to preempt today by just saying that it's a high level overview to idea validation, but in fact, the actual, in reality, the approach to idea validation may be a bit more complex. So starting with a wee bit of background about myself. So for 3 years, I'm in Ireland's New Frontiers Entrepreneur Development Programme at Dundalk Institute of Technology and DCU Invent. And the purpose of this program was to support entrepreneurship and especially early stage innovative technology or manufacturing startups, with the idea that the hope that with the support of the program that they could go on to create sustainable businesses. And by no means an easy journey for any of our startups, because they would be met with many challenges along the road to idea validation, from even starting with themselves, developing themselves as entrepreneurs, while also trying to develop out products and build sales funnels and teams, and not to mention actually trying to secure finance for the next stage of their journey. So the key here, I guess, is that entrepreneurs, by giving them access to tools, knowledge and resources and mentorship that would help them either validate or invalidate an idea. And even if they did invalidate an idea, you know, that skill set could remain with them. They could bring it to the next idea, or in some cases, even if they return to employment, to bring that skill set back with them to the professional. Or so the question is, where did we start when you think about idea validation? And we started with mindsets, and I'm not talking about the traditional kind of mindsets of maybe associated with entrepreneurship, let's just say resilience, determination. We did cover that, but the mindsets that we started with was getting an entrepreneur to view their idea model and not just a solution in isolation. And this is what Ash Mariah would call the innovator's bias, and it's whereby the entrepreneur would prematurely fall in love with their solution in advance of validating it with the market. And a counter mindset to this was trying to get the entrepreneur to love the problem and not this. It was actually probably the first challenge that some of the entrepreneurs would face on the program, especially if they had spent a lot of time, money and energy invested in their idea up to that point. And it can be summarized by this lean stack graphic of Steve versus Larry. And we were trying to get entrepreneurs to be like Larry, because Larry was an innovator, but trying to solve. He would get out of the office and speak to customers. And critically, he would see his idea as a business model and not just a solution. And this was critical for the early stage startups, because especially if they were trying to look for investment, an investor does not per se invest in an idea, in a solution. They invest in business models. So approaching, and I guess at the early stages you feel that there's like a million things that you could be doing or that you should be doing around your idea, but trying to get an easy process for the entrepreneurs to follow was critical. So I'd like to start by just, saying that we were trying to assist them find problem solution fit, whereby they would, at the end of it, problems worth solving, have a clear understanding of the customer's needs, maybe have created a minimum viable product in addition to finding some traction within the marketplace. And to that effect, I rolled out a program in conjunction with Lean Stack based on the entrepreneurial method to idea validation. And it was a 3-step process whereby you would start with a bit by what's riskiest about that business model, and then proceed to test and refine the model in step 3.
Martina, sorry, can I just
yes?
stop you for a second? Would it be possible for you to turn your video off, because the sound is breaking up a little bit, and if you lose your video feed, it might help a little bit. We can hear you. Maybe it's just breaking up now and again, so it's not too bad.
Okay. So
great. Thank you. Sorry about that.
So you can still see my screen, okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
On the entrepreneurial method, start with a business model. You can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first step was to start with a business model. And some of you may be familiar with this graphic. It's a lean canvas as created by Ash Mariah. And we would ask all our the early stages of the program. And it's a simple, let's call it one-page business plan of their idea, whereby they would set out all their assumptions. You're basically filling this in and you're setting out all your assumptions around your idea. And the tool was very easy to fill out, very quick. You can fill it out in 20 minutes. But critically, it was also could act as a communication tool for the startup when trying to. So the boxes at this point would be on the top right-hand corner, customer segments and early adopters, and the boxes on the top left were about problem and existing alternatives. So these were the key boxes at the start. You could also fill out at this point, put in your assumption around your pricing structure, which you would have to validate with the market, and all other assumptions. And you will notice that the solution box is only just a small subset of this canvas, and that's on purpose because, as I said, the solution is just part of your all. overall business model. And yet again, this of a lean canvas in itself was a challenge for some of our entrepreneurs, especially those who may have been on the solution up to that point. Well, we were not doing 5-year financial projections. Rather, we were kind of looking at some metrics behind the business model. And a simple question that we might ask the entrepreneurs at this stage is, what is your minimum success criteria? I.e., what would success look like for you for this business? So like fast forward 5 or 10 years, do you want to create a 1 million business or 10 million turnover business? Kind of what markets do you even see yourself in? But using that minimum success criteria, let's just call it a revenue figure, and doing some back of the envelope calculations by taking in your assumed price and using some of these metrics here and the rates, we could quickly find out and see if this idea could be a valid idea. Step in the entrepreneurial method is to identify what is riskiest about the business model. And yet again, you may all be familiar with this particular graph, the lenses of desirability, viability, and feasibility. And by far, the greatest risk for a lot of these startups was desirability. So riskiest assumptions, like step 2 in the entrepreneurial method, of a lot of our startups would come from their assumptions around customer problem assumptions, because if they got that wrong at the start, everything else in that business model and lean canvas would fall apart. And the third step in the entrepreneurial method, test and refine. So taken with us that we've identified that the riskiest assumption around this business. Step 1 would be to test the problem. And the best way to test a problem is to get out of the building and talk to customers. And so we would recommend that they could speak to at least 10, 20 customers, or early adopters, as we would call them, about the problem. And at this point, you could also be testing multiple customer segments. So you're asking the problem with multiple customer segments, at which point, at this stage, you're not selling your solution, you're listening, you're asking questions of your customers. Talk to early adopters. So who did they conduct these problem interviews with? And it was what we would call early adopters. And the early adopters are kind of that segment of the market immediate need for your solution. And our startups could find, they would use their own creative, innovative ways to find early adopters, whether that's by using some marketing tactics and going in and looking up people on LinkedIn, or critically, if you had come from an industry where you had a lot of networks within that industry, you could quickly tap into those networks for them to test them at the early stage. So problem discovery. So when speaking with the early adopters about problems, you really are trying to find out some of these questions as listed here. Who is your true competition? And a lot of startups would find that their number one competition was probably Excel. That the person trying to build out software wasn't actually competing with some other software developer. They were actually competing with Excel, So it's critical. It was critical to do these problem discovery interviews, because you really do need to find out, is this a problem worth solving? The analogy of, is it an aspirin or a vitamin? And why now? Because circumstances can drive the need. Circumstances can drive particular problems. In COVID represented an opportunity for some of our startups who might have been developing emerging technology, which was fast-tracked due to COVID, because customers had that problem. Other startups were very quickly to pivot their solution to solve a need that COVID had created. So having done your problem, your next step is to now go back and refine your business model. So at this point now, you can go back to your lean canvas and update it with your insights and your discoveries. And that might have a knock-on effect on many of the, let's call them, boxes of the lean canvas, from your existing understanding better now who your existing alternatives are, let's call it, i.e. competition, in addition to understanding what kind of a solution that should be building to address these problems. And the key in all this is to build it iteratively. You know, you don't want to be Steve. You want to build a minimum viable product that ideally would solve the problems of your even early adopters, by offering them something, this unique value proposition that was what we're currently using. And the key in all this is that the job of the entrepreneur is to de-risk their business model assumptions over time. And I've just given the example there of trying to de-risk a problem assumption, but this is something that they would have to do repeatedly over the stages of the program. So that was a very, very high level overview of an entrepreneurial method to idea this model, identifying what is riskiest, and then trying to test and refine that model. And obviously, that's only one step of the process for these entrepreneurs, because after that, the journey, as you can imagine, continues from many other aspects that they would need to address in order to try and make their business model a sustainable one from there forward. You know, approaching idea validation, just, you know, even from my own perspective, it is, you know, if the entrepreneur, if you are driven by a bigger mission or purpose, you know, around what you're trying to do or trying to solve, to have that tenacity, a commitment to the process, a willingness to adapt and pivot, that is so critical, and adapting and pivoting based decisions. And ultimately, if you have some, you know, industry knowledge around that problem at the outset, combined with industry networks, obviously a great team, nobody succeeds alone, that having a great team is critical around you, and ultimately, hopefully, a problem worth solving. So thank you for your time. I hope the audio was okay, Charlie.
It was challenging at times, I have to say, but it was just at times. So certainly the bulk of the message got through. At least I heard it. I hope that others found it the same.
Yeah, the bulk of it got through. Yeah.
Okay. It's just one of those things with technology. You know, it can be just a bit challenging, but no, really valuable. Some really useful insights, Martina. So thank you ever so much for that. I'll open up questions in a second, but I'd never noticed before on the business model canvas that the solution box was so much smaller, you know, and deliberately so, and it makes so much sense that it is. But I think a key thing for me in there was there's a really good process for idea validation. Okay, this is aimed at startups primarily, but it's so much easier to ask yourself the hard questions around an idea if there's a structure and there's a methodology to follow. It's a really good technique. I think it doesn't just apply to startups; it applies to everybody. So I see we've got a couple of hands up. Alan, so your hand first.
Yeah, my hand is up. Just not to have a question, but I have just a build on what Martina just presented. That's very familiar stuff, and it's very much the core of what I've used in the innovation lab that I work in, Citibank. The one build I would put on that, and it's just a kind of a top tip, that we found was a really good process for the sort of startup mentality and for the individual sort of consumer type stuff that you were building. But when it came to validating corporate sales or complex sales to enterprise, which is people selling into Citi or us, looking at internal startups, one of the most important things was just identifying who your stakeholders and your buying centers were. So, if you're building an app for dentists and you go talk to 100 dentists, you'll probably learn something that's really valuable. If you're selling something to Citibank or to Microsoft or to Unilever, you could probably talk to 100 people from Unilever, and you'll get 100 different opinions, but they mightn't be really relevant because they all have different conflicting views. So all of the tools and techniques that Martina presented would be more valuable from an enterprise point of view, as long as you have identified your correct buying center, your correct stakeholder, who's the person with the problem. So, if you're trying to sell software and there's an accounts receivable guy, he does a ton of data entry, and you've got something that's going to make his life miles easier, then it's a gain for him that you've improved his workflow, his UX. It might not be a gain for the guy that has to sign off on that because he doesn't care about the guy's pain who's like 15 levels below him and sits in a different office in a different country. So, I think that was the build that we learned in trying to apply all those kind of startup level customer validation things in a massive organization is, put the work in and identify who your actual customers are and who you're trying to sell to, and tailor your pitch to that, and go from there with all of the things that Martina presented, and absolutely valid, all of them.
Yeah.
Pretty good point. Thank you. Martin, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, and that's so true, Alan. I didn't reference that though, but yeah, understanding who the kind of decision makers are, as well is critical in that process, and identifying problems, and obviously who the decision maker is as well is critical.
Mm-hmm. And I've sold into Alan's company in the past, and you do end up selling to people who are never going to be anywhere near the system, and you're trying to satisfy completely the wrong thing. So yeah, it's a challenging space, definitely. Brian, you have
we're really great to work with like that, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie. Cheers, Alan. Thanks, Martina. That was very enjoyable, and it was, I suppose, following on from what Alan has said. Yeah, I've seen obviously that sort of process before in sort of that innovation accelerator, that you're trying to, validate the customer need first, and then the next stage is the viability, the size of the market. How many people are actually going to be willing to pay money for this, or is it actually a service they're going to be willing to pay money for? And as you said, like Einstein said, if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes really understanding the problem and only 5 minutes on the solution. So it's good to hear we're all saying the same thing, that really is falling in love with the problem. One of the challenges, and I noticed that you mentioned it, and what I found before, and it was interesting what you said, when the entrepreneurs are doing their testing and looking for those early adopters, or what I just call actually a tester, is like, how do you actually find, and Alan mentioned that they're the right testers to me, so that you don't get, unbiased opinion, because if you're sort of looking through your LinkedIn network, the chances are they'll be a little bit favorable to you to a certain extent. And I'm not saying that that's a wrong thing, but like, one of the challenges that I'm in the middle of doing something, and how do I actually identify the right testers, the right demographics, which is representative of the actual need out there in the market, rather than what and I'd be just interested to know, any other people's opinions on that? You know, is it a case of nearly, you know, advertising it that you're looking for testers and then taking them through some sort of qualifying, you know, sequence or questionnaire to a certain extent? But to me, that was a key piece, because, okay, we want to fall in love with the problem. We really want to understand it from the customer's side, the potential customer problem. But then, how do we identify those? And I always find that to be a challenge. And so, you know, unless I'm 100% confident, well, then the research is telling me a little bit more than I knew. But do I still need to refine it again and go back to the business model? So I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on how do you actually find what you think are the right testers, are early adopters, as you mentioned, Martina, from a startup perspective.
I was going to say, we'll go back to Martina first then on that. So, I mean, how did you point the companies in the right direction for that element?
Well, I guess my reference, at that about that is that the entrepreneurs, some of the entrepreneurs that came to us actually knew that this problem existed because of either they worked in that industry, worked with a particular company, and were all in that company, and they're, you know, trying to even validate it with that network, you know, what was a starting point for them. But you're trying to follow as well. It's, yeah, where do you find early adopters? So you're trying to look for people that might, like, let's say, you know, if you might go to events where you know that there's a particular topic. We have a topic here now on idea validation. So people are struggling with that topic. So you might attend events or networking events around a particular subject to try and find early adopters. There's no, I guess, science to it. I guess for entrepreneurs that came to us, you know, if it depends where the source of that problem might have been coming from an industry. Start with that industry might have been a good point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I mean, as you said, there's no right answer to the question to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, is there a list of, you know, approaches to take that you can sort of, okay, let's work our way down through this list to try and find that. That was kind of the general idea, because I do struggle to actually find, you know, and you know, sort of a framework or a sequence actually to find the right testers or the right people that, you know. But it is trial and error. That's how we learn. So.
Okay. Shane, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted, just in response to Brian's question there, one thing I've tried which has worked is I use my network, but I ask my network to recruit people who are a step removed from me. And that, you know, that sort of gets more hands on deck when you have limited resources to recruit people, but it also means the people that you're recruiting are not connected directly to you, and they're more inclined to give you honest answers.
That's good point. Owen, I'll come to you in a second, but I think along the same lines as that, it's important to let people know what you want from them, you know, because sometimes you do just want an affirmation to say, yeah, you're great, carry on doing what you're doing, because you need that. Other times you need a critique. You need somebody to constructively take the thing apart and be quite hard with you. And if you don't tell them that that's what you want, then the majority of people will come back and say, you're doing a great job, it was worth throwing in the day job for. You know, just carry on. So, Owen, sorry, Owen, you had a point on that? You're on mute, Owen.
Yeah, you do need to test for the extremes, not just the extremes, but if you're leaving out all the extremes, you really are discounting that critique, that extra voice. A question back to Martina, I guess it's two-pronged. One, Ash Moria, lean startup, where it sounds like lean startup is a model. I mean, do you have a prime reference point? Do you have a guru? Is that what you found to be most useful? Would you name check any other model as well as that? And I have a follow-up question to that as well.
Yeah, so a process. Do you see, there's lots of tools, techniques out there, but I find a lot of them might have been disjointed. Do you know that you couldn't I was trying to find something that the entrepreneur could follow through with from the start right through in a process under the one umbrella, under the one platform. And I liked his approach because it had kind of everything, the tools, the content as well. He did his approach is a mix up of he created the lean canvas. You know, it's different obviously to the business model canvas, similar but different. And I liked his approach because it was kind of everything under the one umbrella. And obviously there are, you know, step 3 of that entrepreneurial approach, test and refine lean startup principles as well. From my perspective, you know, it was clear, simple process with the content and the tools so that they could follow it in a kind of sequential manner. Obviously there's other, you know, starting with reading obviously the lean startups and whatnot is obviously a good starting point as well for any startups.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Before we move on, and I know Shirley is eager to get in here quickly, but the second part of my really important question is, you mentioned talk to the customer, test to the customer. Charlie and others built on that, said watch out for the extremes. There's one school of thought says talk to the customer. Another school of thought says ignore the customer, go deeper, do field studies, sit with the apes and eat their bananas. What do you think about the anthropological approach?
So, so a lot of, you know, a lot of our startups, I guess, yeah, you need to get a deep understanding of, if I'm picking this up correct, but we kind of would always recommend them to speak to the customer to get a deep understanding of the problem. Some of them had actually experienced the problem themselves, and that's why they were coming to us with this idea. You know, because there's, I guess there's many different sources of them first identified that problem. You know, is it just from talking with customers, or actually have you experienced the problem yourself? Is that, but I don't know if that answers your question. It probably not getting to the root of your question, Owen.
No, that's fine. Your answer is you advise your clients definitely talk to the customers.
Can I just
yes. Yes.
Just one point on that. I mean, there's a difference between customers and users as well. The person paying the bill is not necessarily the person who's going to use whatever it is. So I think, yeah, you need to get buy-in from the person who's going to pay the bill, but you need to support and meet the needs of the users. Because if you don't do that, then adoption, and we've seen this in big companies with IT systems going in that are bought, but they don't fit because they ask the wrong people. So I think it's critical to actually cover both. Shirley, you had your hand up, you put it down again.
Exactly the same point I was going to say, Charlie. So, and I think, you know, the role, I couldn't agree more with everything you say in terms of the role of the business model and the steps. Martina, I really, really do like that. But I always see it as, you know, the main role of a business model is to connect the technical potential with the realization of economic value. So I would sort of see it as, you know, if you have the technical potential on one side and you have the value on the other side, and the value ultimately depends on who the users is. So the value can mean different things to different people. So I can think some work that we did with, particularly in healthcare, you know, for ambient assisted living solutions. For people with dementia. And ultimately, perhaps the customer might be the person with the dementia or the healthcare provider, but what we defined as the surrogate user, the people who were getting the greatest value off it, were those who were actually caring for the individual from dementia, because the solution gave them 4 hours out of the house to go and do something useful with their time. And I think, just picking up on what Owen said as well, I just think there still is today a huge role for the wider ethnographic type research. You think of, you know, Akira Mariato, who invented the Sony Walkman. You know, he spent time, and he sat and watched kids in playgrounds when at the time they had the big ghetto blasters, you know, and that's, so he really looked at what the users were doing. And it very much depends on the life cycle of your technology, whether you're looking for a tester, whether you're looking for something essentially where your innovation is going to make it, you know, a lifestyle difference to them. So I think most of the entrepreneurs I work with, they start with the value proposition, which is the middle of the canvas, which is the wrong way around. You know, Steve Jobs, lots of people said it, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology. But who your customer is and how you define that very much depends on the experience of the entrepreneur, and I think just the life cycle on where it is in terms of that, in terms of the investment cycle. I don't know if that's
great point. Thank you. Brian, go to you. Sorry, Brian Dernan, and then on to Shane.
Well, thanks very much for that, Charlie. Martina, excellent. Really liked it. Great presentations all the way through on this. Just one quick question on just customer personas, and also the design thinking. When they look at how customers do this and they ask them the how might we question and bring those through, and looking at the persona of each one of the kind of customers at the end. But I was on a call yesterday, and we were talking about how venture capitalists, when they're looking at startups now, will look at the value proposition and ask about, okay, there's an economic financial return, but what is the societal impact and what is the inclusion? And a big conversation's happening around there about this new idea can't just be to return money. So those things I think are a wee bit missing from some of the canvases these days. There needs to be a revise of some of the canvases to look at those. Could I just ask what your views are on that?
Yes, and sorry, because my connection's not the best, and I'm picking up pieces of the questions. But yes, the canvas doesn't, I believe, address, as I showed in around the last slides, the journey continues, and customer personas, you know, getting competitive understanding your customers and the market research and personas. But critically, you know, when you're looking at an idea, you're trying to, you know, look at it as well through you know, sustainability as well, and what aspects of this idea that might not be on that canvas, you know, or corporate social responsibilities, etc. I think that is critical, because that is part of your business case as well. And I do agree it may not be on the canvas, but definitely around sustainability, we always, you know, are you know, encouraging the entrepreneurs to think about sustainability within their solutions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Martina. Shane?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add into that thing about, you know, when you talk to customers, is it simply a case of just asking them the question? I'm a big fan of the Freakonomics guys, and in particular there's Owen holding up their third book, Think Like a Freak, which goes into this whole thing of sometimes the worst thing you can do is to ask somebody why, particularly why. You know, asking somebody what they'll do is reasonably reliable, but the why is often not. And so I think we absolutely do need to talk to our customers or our potential customers. But sometimes we need to design experiments to uncover their real motivations rather than simply ask them. And usually the only reason we don't do that is time. And it's hard to put the time and resources into this sort of more circuitous route to an insight rather than simply saying, sure, they'll tell me. And often they won't.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just.
It's a brilliant point, Shane. And yeah, it's about validating the challenge. You know, way before you've got any ideas to solve the challenge. If you don't understand the problem, then you solve the symptoms. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but that's the danger.
And actually, I think it's one of the reasons why talking about the problem really works, is because people are actually more honest when they're talking about the problems than they are when they're talking about whether they like or dislike your solution. I think you get deeper insight into what really matters to them when they're looking at it through the lens of problem.
Okay, yeah. Really good point. Thank you. Any other, just one, maybe time for one more, Brian?
Can I just add to that? And I think the other Brian mentioned it, and that's what got me thinking. It's that sort of design thinking piece, and probably tying into where Martina was like, I would always put the design thinking piece before the lean startup piece. Of the lean startup is the way of actually delivering it, but the ideation is really done around the design thinking piece. And again, it probably goes back a little bit to what Owen said, you know, do you ask your customers or don't you? You know, and it's like, you know, if you take the design thinking approach, you know, you really hit the customer's unmet needs, or the needs they never even thought they had. Like, I didn't realize I needed Revolut until I actually had it, and all of a sudden I'm using it for, why would I, you know, I don't need to bring my card with me around. So it's that sort of, you know, that sort of design thinking, along with the lean startup, and even in large organizations, myself and Alan, you know, in innovation labs, it's still the same sort of thinking that's required, whether you're a startup or whether you're in an organization. But I think, you know, the whole design thinking piece, and, you know, you observe what people are doing, you try and you ask, obviously, and we've touched obviously on the ask, going out and ask the customer, but you have to ideally try the three aspects of that and surface some of those unmet needs. It's like, you know, what Amazon have done with, not only have they obviously transformed online retail, you know, but, you know, with their Amazon Go stores in the US, they realize that customers, an unmet need, they don't like queuing, you know. So an Amazon Go store, you don't queue at the check-in, you basically have it and you just walk out the door and it's paid for now. So that's an unmet need, you know. And by taking that sort of approach, I think a lot of organizations are that really strong human-centric design approach, you know, that's where you sort of really tie into the ideas, and then validating obviously those ideas, and using lean startup as a key part within that. But it does all flow and it does all link together, so which is good. So there are frameworks there.
It does indeed. Thanks, Brian. Yeah. I suppose one more quick question, if you don't mind. Obviously, validating ideas can be expensive. You know, it is an expensive process. So, how did you determine the level of maturity of an idea? Is there a kind of a gateway that an idea should go through before you even get into validating it?
Yeah. So, and apologies, as I say, my connection keeps cutting out. But Charlie, yeah. So even at the early stages, you're doing even back the envelope calculations around this idea. So even around anticipating even price points, because before you generate revenue, okay, there is a number of, for those in marketing, that you'll know that there's a number of steps that a customer must go through, and that sales funnel before you get to revenue, and each one of those steps costs money. And depending on what type of business model you have, whether you're a B2B model or a B2C model, or, you know, there's many different models. The metrics, looking at some of the metrics around, you know, cost of customer acquisition, how long customer churn rates, you know, what are typical conversion rates for this industry. So there's a lot of metrics that you can use to even try and validate an idea before it even gets off the ground, if that makes sense. Even costs. You don't. The idea is that you want to create a business model that is repeatable and scalable, and you don't want to be creating something where customers use it for one day and then throw it to one side, you know. So it's about that repeatability and scalability. So those metrics, I think at the early stage, doing, as I say, back of the envelope calculations, can offer some insights into the ideas.
Great stuff. Thank you. I love Catherine's comment on that if it's still worth pursuing after 3 sleeps. then it's probably still worth pursuing. Excellent one.
That's
okay.
Why we keep you around, Catherine. That's why we keep you around.
Yeah, my stage gate. I have my life is one big post-it note.
Okay, I'm conscious. Shane, you have your hand up. I don't know if there's another point or whether it's no. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. So I suppose really a couple of things. Firstly, we've no formal meetup next week, but we do have the coffee stop. Those have actually been, they're really informal, no agenda, but they've actually been really useful. There's some good stuff has come out of them. So if you're around next Friday, just join in and sort of have a chat. We've got our first Speakers Corner on the 12th of March, an external speaker. That's an open event. So if there are other people outside of this group that you think would benefit from it, then please share and please register on Eventbrite as well. We do now have a calendar published, which I will try and put into the chat here while I remember, where you can see all of the stuff we've got going on. And all the connection details, registration details, if they apply, should be all in that. So I think, unless there's anything else, just like to say thanks to everybody. Owen has his hand up. Sorry, Owen.
I do. I know everybody wants to get back to business as usual, but we did say we'd do a minute, kind of in terms of an update on other stuff. ISO, I'll come back to you on that stuff. It's always happening in the background. It's not always exciting. I have a question for you, which I don't need you to answer during today, but I will come back to you on it. How should we visualize for ourselves or for others the idea management process? Validation, of course, being a big part of that. But I'm not being entirely selfish. This is the current draft of the new ISO standard on idea management. So we're looking for how to visualize it in here for the world for the next 10, 15 years. So we can contribute to that in our little network, which is a cool thing to be able to do. Just bear that in mind. I will come back to you on that question. The second point for today is it is one of the themes, the parts of our strategy, which we've also been developing and we're pretty much ready to share as we speak. Charlie, you want to say something about that in terms of where we are?
Yeah, I mean, just look out for it next week. We're going to share what we've been doing in terms of planning, high-level objectives, how we're going to measure ourselves, what we think might get in the way, what we're going to do about that, potential partnership. So we'll just share that with everybody. We'll post it up, and that's what you can hold us to, contribute to, and support, hopefully.
Please do. And yeah, we really do need help getting the right people. Ask who might be there, who might be interested on the 12th of March. Because it's a great speaker, great topic. I love the title. So quickly on the other front, we talk about in that strategy, professional development and certification. Today is not the day, but ask yourself again a design thinking question. Well, what do we mean by that? What should we be doing about that? How might we, in our network, look at professional development and certification? There is, by the way, and it's been posted in our LinkedIn group recently, a new Enterprise Ireland IDA panel of innovation consultants. And luckily we are involved with them in putting that panel together. We don't get to say so, but it's great that our members should be put together because of our experience with ISO and other pieces. So again, that's one of the ways our network can help. Watch out. If it's fascinating to you, let us know. We'd love some help. Done.
Okay. Thanks, Owen. Brian, you're asking about the link for the coffee stop. Hopefully, people can access the calendar to be able to see the link in there. If not, come back to me and I'll try and share it a different way. So the only thing left really to say is thanks to everybody for contributing today. Really great points, usual good discussion, really good to hear from you all. And of course, a massive thank you to Martina for taking the time to prepare and to present a really interesting overview. There were some quirks on the sound, but the content was so clear, and it was really well presented. So thank you so much for doing that.
It's about that.
No problem.
Yeah.
If you can hang on just at the end, we'll have a quick chat, see if there's something we can do to get a clearer recording of it to post online, so that people can not miss out on the bits that you said. So it's been fantastic. Thank you so much, Martina, for taking the time. Yeah. And
thank you, Charlie, and thank you, everybody. And as I say, it was a very high-level overview. You know, it's much more coming.
Thanks,
It's been brilliant. Okay, thanks everybody, and shall hopefully see you all next week.